Go. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Pace and Space podcast. Once again, this is your host Calvin, and joined with me by my co-host Leif. How you doing, Hank? Leif?
I'm doing all right. How you doing, everyone?
And so last episode we spoke a lot about the Eastern Conference. We talked it up with about the Sixers, about Ben Simmons, Chris Bosh, and who do we think has the best chance of taking down the Cavs in the East. But on this episode, we're going to shift to the Western Conference now. And we have a lot of things to talk about in there. There's, once again, as strong of a conference as ever. There's so many big teams to talk about. You know, we have the elephant in the room over, in Northern California, where the big acquisition of the summer, Kevin Durant, landed. And we have to see if anyone even has a chance of taking them down. But Leif, what are your overall thoughts about the Western Conference heading into this season?
I think we're going to see more of the same in the Western Conference, and I think we're going to see the rise of some teams that pretty much have been on the door, knocking on the door, have been making some incremental moves, and I think this is going to be the year for some teams. Some of the teams they have in mind we're going to make a jump are Utah and Denver, teams who have gotten younger, teams that are getting some players back healthy. And so those are two of the teams I think we need to look out for this season. And I'm not saying that they're going to be a top 4 seed, but I think they could be knocking on the door around the 7th and 8th seed.
Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of teams that we have questions about. One team that surprised everyone last year is the Portland Trailblazers. Everyone thought this would be another rebuilding year for them, especially with LaMarcus Aldridge going to San Antonio. Everyone thought, okay, that's it. It's gonna be a while before they find themselves back in the thick of the Western Conference. And then to everyone's surprise, Terry Stotts really coached his butt off with this team. He got a lot out of the front court of Mason Plumlee, Al-Farouq Aminu, Myers Leonard, guys like that. And CJ McCollum, wow, what a jump he made last season. He went from potential, third or fourth option to being, perhaps a bona fide all-star moving forward. But can they do it again, Leif? What do you think? Can the Blazers be a top 4 team again in the West?
I don't think so. I think I expected them to do a little bit more during the off season, especially to fix up their big men, their front court. I was expecting them to at least look at that. I know they have some guys up there with Leonard, and they were trying to, I guess, create this atmosphere where you don't have to have one main big guy. You can rotate them as needed. But I expected them to make a big move. And I'm not talking about no Festus Ezeli kind of move, but I was expecting a better move in a front court. Lillard and McCollum, nothing bad about them. I think they're going to have a great season, but I think the rest of the league is going to catch up to them, and they're going to have some growing pains this season.
Yeah, I mean, that remains to be seen. Lillard, we're on year 4, I think, with Lillard. I think he's just as good. I think he's a superstar. I think he can give you a lot of what any of the top point guards can. I think he's better than most of the other top point guards in the league right now. He's really shown himself to be that franchise player that I don't think anybody expected him to be when the Sixers drafted him 6th in that draft years ago. But he's really legit. I think CJ McCollum's legit too. I think Portland knew what they were doing when they drafted these two guys. They both were 4-year grads coming out of mid-major colleges where they got to basically be the guy, have to go into these tournaments where other teams' whole defense was revolved around trying to stop them, and they were still able to get their shots, still create offense for themselves and their teammates. And you've seen a lot of those skills basically translate into the NBA. These are two smart guys, they're heady guys. Lillard is more athletic than McCollum, but neither one of them are, just bullying their way to points. They're smart guys. They know how to get open. They know how to run offenses, run the sets that the coaches are giving them. And I think this is something that, the rest of the league is going to have to deal with for the next couple of years. This tandem that scores with better than or as good as any other tandem you can put them side by side with. You got two 20-plus scorers every night that are coming to you not just with great passing and great ability to get to the rim, but great three-point shooting too. So I think these guys are legit. And no, Festus Ezeli is not a big signing, nor is Evan Turner. But when you compare them to the players that they were relying on last year, are they better? Yeah. I mean, Festus Ezeli is probably a better center than Myers Leonard or Mason Plumlee, who they still have as well. And Myers Leonard is better than a lot of the wing players they were relying on, who have still yet to show that they can do this sort of production on a consistent basis. So at the very least, it gave them some certainty with players that might, or positions that might have been question marks, where they weren't sure they were going to get the repeat performances. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. You got those wing guys there. I mean, they just made some questionable moves. I mean, they signed Alan Crabb for a 4-year, $75 million contract.
Well, to be fair, they matched. To be fair, they matched it. They didn't outright give him that offer.
Okay, I'll give you that. They did that, and I still stand by what I said. They need a big guy on that team. Now, do you know a team who has plenty of big men? One who can probably go over to Portland?
Philadelphia 76ers?
Yep. I would have liked to see something like that take place. I know we were hearing all about this Celtics talk and Lakers talk. We even heard a little bit about Atlanta. But I would have liked to see either Noel or Okafor in Portland. And if I saw something like that, I would think that they could repeat.
I hear what you're saying. You bring up some good points. I don't know. I think they still have their two best players that are going to perform more or less the same they performed last year. And you got some smarter veterans in Evan Turner and Festus Ezeli. Both of these guys coming from teams and cultures that bring a lot of good. They can bring a lot of good habits to this team that has a lot of young, unproven guys, or guys still trying to prove themselves that they can compete day in, day out on a consistent level. So I think this was more of a, we like what we have, we want to keep fostering and building what we have type of moves. Trading for, Okafor or Noel, that may have been the better upside move. But if you're Portland, who on your roster are you willing to trade that would have been able to net you a Noel or Okafor in the first place?
That's a good point, too. Was Harkless a free agent this year?
Maybe. I think so.
I would say a Harkless, some picks. If you're thinking that right now you're ready to make it, then you'll gamble some of those picks. And I know the Sixers love draft picks, so they'll take it. But you got a point. Who will they be willing to trade or let go in order to get that center?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I know you said they could maybe offer up a package with some draft picks, but another thing about the Blazers, they're not really a team that likes to move their draft picks. They're perfectly okay with getting draft picks, but last few years, I can't think of a year where they actually moved draft picks to get a player. They'll wait for them in free agent. They'll spend some money. They'll even spend some money to retain the guys that they have. But they're not really a team that likes to trade away future assets to get talent for the here and now. But I get what you're saying. There was definitely some upside moves that could have been made. Maybe they missed out on the Kevin Love train at some point last season, but it probably would have involved them trading away C.J. McCollum, and that doesn't seem like a move perhaps the team was comfortable making. Because, I tell you right now, C.J. McCollum and Lillard, that's the dynamic I don't think you want to mess with for the next couple of years. They seem really in sync. And, a lot of teams would kill to have the backcourt that they have right now. This is the backcourt Washington thought they were going to have with Wall and Beal, but Beal just can't seem to stay on the court.
Yeah, he can't stay healthy, and I think right now that dynamic is not the one that we were hoping to see, but I agree. Lillard and McCollum, that is a dynamic that I look forward to seeing for years to come.
Yeah, as do I. And, Mason Plumlee, Al-Farouq Aminu, these guys are at an age where perhaps their bump in production was legit. That rise in their consistency came at an age where you would expect players to get better. So maybe these gains are legit. But at the same time, maybe it was a 1-year bump. This happens as well. That's why we have to see what happens with them this season. But while I don't know for sure, I'm not going to pencil them in as a top 4 team again. I think if they're not a top 4 team, they're still close to it, maybe in the 5 or 6 seed instead of the 4th seed. But yeah, I still think they're in that same area. They're still going to win the same amount of games, maybe a few more. They're going to be right around 50, I think, this season. And, I really think that they have something to work with there.
Utah is coming. That's
Utah.
all I have to say.
Okay, you brought up Utah. Let's talk about Utah real quick. What's the big deal about Utah?
Utah was a team who was knocking on the door last season, and they had some pretty bad injuries. They had some growing pains. They're still young. But when you look at what they had or who they brought in, they brought in Joe Johnson. They brought in George Hill. They brought in Boris Diaw. These are guys who know how to win, know how to play. You're going to have a healthy, or hopefully healthy, Dante Exum this year with Alec Burks. Rodney Hood, last season, he grew into a good player.
He did.
He was a player who we looked at and we were hoping what was he going to become, and look what he showed us. So, and then unlike Portland, they actually have a center in Rudy Gobert. It's just a team that seems that they're ready to take this to the next level.
That is the overwhelming opinion about Utah, and you mentioned a lot of great points, and I'm not hating on Utah. I definitely think that they're poised to, fight for maybe somewhere between the 6th or 8th seed. I don't know. I'm hearing more than that though, and now they're dealing with Gordon Hayward, who's going to be out 6 weeks. That's the one question I have on this team. Who is the guy? Is it Gordon Hayward? Is it Derek Favors? Is it going to end up having to be Joe Johnson? Who's the guy on this team?
Does there have to be a guy?
Well, I'll put it this way. Name me one team in that Western Conference that you can say is going to be a playoff team that doesn't have a clear guy.
True. But maybe in this instance, you still have, you have solid players there. Derek Favors, the backcourt looks good. even when you lose Hayward, you still have Joe Johnson who can step into that small forward spot. It's just a solid team.
It is a solid team. I'm not saying they're not solid, but we're also talking about the Western Conference. There's about 2 or 3 solid teams every year that don't make the playoffs. Except last year where it was just everyone was all messed up with injuries and underperformance, but typically over the last 10 years there's been at least 2, maybe even 3 at times solid teams that could have been 500 if they weren't facing such strong opposition, or they were at 500 or better and didn't make the playoffs. What's going to really separate the Jazz from those other teams this year? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to separate them, but what I'm hoping is the fact that they pretty much kept their team intact. They only lost players who were, I want to say, they could have lost or got rid of, whether it's Trey Burke or whoever. But they're a team that stayed intact. They're a team who played well for stretches last season. They got bit by the injury bug. I mean, they're not even there with Hayward not being there for 6 weeks. But when you look at it as a whole, I think that you're looking at a team who is hungry and just needs the experience. So I would be surprised if they don't make the playoffs next season.
Yeah, and when you look at other teams that may be taking a downward turn, there are definitely some spots to be had. Who's to say if Dallas is going to be a playoff team again this year? People seem to be going both ways when it comes to the Thunder now that Durant's left. Some people think Westbrook is just going to have this ungodly season and he's going to just will them into like the 5th or 6th seed anyway, and then other people say they're just going to be like 42-40 and probably just miss making the playoffs. So it still remains to be seen what's going to happen with that team. So you have Mavericks, Thunder, Rockets. The Rockets. I wanted to talk to you about the Rockets, actually, now that I brought it up, actually. Do you think that the Rockets and James Harden can have a bounce back this year under Coach Mike D'Antoni?
Oh, they are going to have a great season.
A great season. Wow. What are we talking about?
I mean, think about what you have with D'Antoni and Harden. You have a match made in heaven. All offense, no defense. I mean, can you imagine that scores is going to be 135 to 120 every night?
In whose favor, though? The Rockets or the other teams?
It's going to be in the Rockets' favor. Let me tell you, here's what I see. When D'Antoni and his other stop, I kind of look at what Steve Nash, what he was able to do for him. Steve Nash was able to, dribble the ball, create his shot, create shots for other people, and that kind of put him on a pedestal and got him those 2 MVP awards, which he did not, necessarily deserve those 2 MVP awards, but I'll leave that alone. But then I look at what happened with his other stops. He went to the Knicks. He didn't have that player when he went to the Knicks. When he went to the LA, again, he didn't have that player. Now he has a guy in Harden who can dribble the ball up the court and, when willing, can create opportunities for other players. And then he has a player, Harden, that he didn't have before, in Ryan Anderson, who is just going to shoot and have open shots all day. I mean, this is a team that you have to watch out for. Yeah. And I'm about to say this. I'm going to put it down. I think James Harden is going to be the MVP this season.
Wow. That's a bold claim. That is a bold claim. In some respects, it's not because he was a runner-up only 2 years ago. And on the other side, I would say that's bold when you think about the season he had last year. He came in out of shape, had one of his worst seasons efficiency wise, and he just went back to being a turnstile on defense. I don't think that's going to change under Mike D'Antoni. I actually could say for sure it's not going to change. This team is going to put up points. Harden's going to put up points. But I think the one thing the last couple of years has kind of shown or exposed about Harden is yeah, he's this great ball handler, and yeah, he's going to get his assists, but it's almost at the point where it's to the detriment of the team. I still think he would be better off not being the main ball handler, especially when you consider he's the two guard and how he's the one that needs to be the main scorer on that team. The difference between him and say like a Steve Nash back when D'Antoni was coaching the Suns is that Steve Nash did not need to be the leading scorer on that team, and most of those seasons he wasn't the leading scorer on that team. It was Stoudemire, or it was Sean Marion, or I think even Joe Johnson was scoring more than him that when he was in Phoenix. So Steve Nash was a scorer, yes, but he was one of many options. He wasn't the option, and he was able to run that offense to get everyone else shots. Now, is James Harden going to take about 5 shots less, bump up to 12, 13 assists a game, maybe only averaging 20 points a game, so that the rest of the team can get easy buckets, transition buckets, open shots in a flow that isn't just him dribbling for 20 seconds and then kicking it out? I don't know. You tell me.
I think that was the issue that he had before, where he would dribble, and then pass the ball out. I call that the LeBron syndrome. Dribble the ball out so there's no time on the clock, pass it out, and then get mad when nothing happens. In this instance, or in this case, or James Harden, shoot the ball or draw a foul. I mean, we know what he does.
Yeah.
But I think that if he can still go back and still average his 25, 26 points a game, and if you look at his numbers last season he played all 82 games. He averaged 29 points, 7.5 assists, and 6 rebounds.
Yeah.
Those are good numbers.
Great numbers.
So if you look at it, if he can go back in there and still score 27 points, we know those assist numbers are going up by at least 1 or 2. So he's going to get you close to 9, maybe even 10 assists. You're looking at a guy who's going to give you 28 and 10. I mean, that's not bad. That's not bad at all.
No, it's not. But, I have 3 words for you. Harden, D'Antoni, defense. Those 3 things do not go together. And it's going to be a very interesting season. People keep talking about D'Antoni as this offensive guru. D'Antoni has not coached an elite offensive team since he left the Suns. And you can say, well, he didn't have personnel. Maybe, but he chose to go to the teams that he signed for. He chose to go to the Knicks. He chose to go to the Lakers, and he did not create a system that worked for those teams. I don't think he's an adaptable coach. Personally, I feel like he is a system guy, and he either has players that fit his system or he doesn't. And when he has players that don't fit his system, things get ugly. It got ugly in New York, and it got ugly in LA. I can easily see things getting ugly again in Houston, because he has a lot of offensively challenged players on that team. this was a team that, yeah, they like to chuck threes, but now he has Clint Capella as his starting center. Trevor Ariza is a limited offensive speaking wise three. Patrick Beverley is a very limited point guard offensively. I could easily see D'Antoni not even wanting to play Patrick Beverley. And I feel like this is a powder keg situation. That's me personally. I feel like we disagree on this, but I think this is a powder keg. I think this is a toxic locker room waiting to happen. It already became a toxic locker room with Kevin McHale. And Kevin McHale is kind of seen as a player's coach. He's an ex-player. He's a guy that, gets the team playing for each other, has great defensive sets. The team loved playing for him the first couple years. Then it went all downhill with Dwight and James Harden last year. And now you're bringing in D'Antoni, who's a lot rougher around the edges and is a lot more you play my way or you don't play at all. And I think there's a lot of guys in that Houston locker room that's going to rub the wrong way, personally.
I think there's some guys going to rub the wrong way, and I think that, at the end of the day, there's going to be some players who aren't going to make it throughout the season. But I still had this feeling that Harden is going to surprise us. He's got a staff. D'Antoni has a staff right now outside of the small forward position that can surprise a lot of people. They can go small if they want to. They still have, I'm about to say Nene. I mean, he's going to get hurt anyway. But, I mean, you still got some young guys on that team. They can all get it together. They showed already through 2 preseason games they have the ability to score at will.
Oh yeah, they're gonna score. That's not even a question. They're gonna score. They're gonna put up points. But you brought up Nene. That to me is one of the key guys I think is gonna have a problem with D'Antoni. This has Pau Gasol 2.0 written all over it. He's a more offensively minded big man who doesn't shoot threes, likes to play with his back to the basket or at the elbow. A lot of the same things Pau likes to do. And you would think a guy like that would fit in an offensively minded playing style like D'Antoni preaches, but it didn't work with Pau, and I could easily see it not working with Nene. But maybe that won't matter because Nene will get hurt, and then who knows. But that's the guy. I think Patrick Beverley is another guy that it could go very bad for real quickly. And, if you're not starting Beverley, who are you starting? If you're not playing Nene, then, who's playing a lot of the power forward minutes? I guess Ryan Anderson. But, the only 2 guys that you really go crazy about D'Antoni coaching are the 2 guys that are the worst guys on defense on this team, James Harden and Ryan Anderson. When you look at all of D'Antoni's best teams, the guys that he could put out on the court to get him offense, a lot of them were self-inclined to play defense. Stoudemire, Sean Marion, Raja Bell, Joe Johnson, Barbosa, all those guys instinctually were good on defense, so he didn't have to coach them, and his defensive deficiencies were not on display because Marion, Joe Johnson, Raja Bell, all those guys, they picked up that slack just on their own natural defensive ability. You don't have that same system or that same setup here because all the guys that have those natural defensive instincts on this team have very limited offensive capabilities. Clint Capella is very limited on offense. Patrick Beverley is limited on offense. Who knows what you're going to get out of Trevor Ariza at this point? And Trevor Ariza wasn't even that good on defense last year either. Maybe that was because of the toxic situation, or maybe that's just because he's losing a step and losing the ability he once had in his prime. I don't know, but to me, this smells like another 8th seed when it comes to the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, you make good point. especially if talking about players who aren't defensive minded. You also have Eric Gordon on this team as well.
Oh yeah, forgot about Eric Gordon. He actually might be a good
And
fit. He actually might be a good fit there.
right, good shooter. Is going to be able to stretch the floor, get his shot. So, I mean, they're going to have a bounce back. I do see them, you know, 6 seed, 6 seed, maybe 5th seed. Making it anywhere far in the playoffs, I don't see that happening. I mean, I just think that when the playoff time comes around, I think that's when you look for defense. And as you said, they don't have that defensive mind or those kind of players, especially with D'Antoni. But if you're talking about through the season, I think they're gonna have a bounce back. I think they're gonna be a 5th seed.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. Interesting. They're definitely going to be a point of interest this season. Just for the fact to see what James Harden is going to do this season after last season was a point of interest. But now you add D'Antoni, who's a very he gets a lot of talk. A lot of chatter happens when Mike D'Antoni's on the team. So they're definitely a team to watch this season in the West. Another team that's very interesting to me is the LA Clippers. The LA Clippers are entering, what is this, year 6 now of the Chris Paul and Blake Griffin partnership. I think it's year 4 or 5 with Doc Rivers as the head coach. And we're still looking at this team waiting to see when they'll even make the Western Conference Finals, let alone be the contender people keep saying they are every year. And then when you look at the contract situations, Chris Paul is in a contract year, Blake Griffin is in a contract year. Are we looking at the end of this Clippers era?
I hate to say it, but I think we're coming to the point where this is going to be the end. And I think the writing was on the wall for some time now. I think when you think about who they have on their team, Chris Paul and Griffin. Let me talk about Griffin first. Griffin to me is a player who can almost be a point forward. I look at him almost like a Lamar Odom back in the day, a guy who can bring the ball up the court, a guy who can pass, and that's how he is. But when you play in a system with Chris Paul, who quite possibly, and to me, is the best floor general in the NBA, that skill set is not needed. And so you're used to having the ball in your hand. You're not getting the ball in your hand. I think that creates a conflict between Paul and Griffin. And so moving forward into this season, I think this is the last season of their partnership. I think that Chris Paul is going to re-sign with the Clippers. I don't see where else he's going to go. But I think this is the end of the road for Griffin in LA.
So he's gonna go test the free agent market, see where he can land moving forward. That's interesting because Blake Griffin seems pretty comfortable in LA. He seems to like all the opportunities available to him. He's done a bit of acting. He did some stand-up comedy not too long ago. It really seems like somebody like him would try to stay in LA if he could. So that's interesting. I really don't know how this is gonna shake out because it's obvious that you cannot maximize either one of Chris Paul or Blake Griffin by having them together on the same team. The only one that seems to work well with both is DeAndre Jordan, and that's because his whole skill set is catching their alley-oop passes, more or less. So that's pretty easy for him. But I look again at this, and I look at Doc Rivers, and they brought in Doc Rivers to take them to the next level. He, after coming off that 2008 championship with the Celtics and going to the finals in 2010, the perception of Doc Rivers as a coach improved dramatically from where it was before that season. But when you look at this whole tenure with the Clippers, you actually kind of have two dilemmas with Doc Rivers. You have some dilemmas with him as a coach, where he has been able to find a way to maximize Blake Griffin and Chris Paul together. And then you also have the issue of Doc Rivers as the GM slash president of basketball operations. And where I keep staring every season is the small forward position. How has this team gone 4 or 5 years now with Doc Rivers at the helm and not been able to find a decent small forward?
I don't know. It's mind-boggling to think they've gone this far, where your small forward that you're looking at is Wesley Johnson and Paul Pierce.
Yeah, and Paul Pierce, who's obviously retiring this season. And if you're gonna recount on one of those guys, it's probably gonna be Paul Pierce over Wesley Johnson. And not only that, I mean, we're still trying to say that Austin Rivers is the backup point guard here. I don't know about that either.
Yeah, and are you gonna tell me there's no nepotism there? I mean, Austin Rivers. Let's think about this for a second. Austin Rivers is making $11 million this season. We're talking about a guy who was bounced around, theoretically should be in the D League, but right now he is your backup point guard. By the way, they also have Raymond Felton. So
Right.
now, who would you rather be your backup point guard, Raymond Felton or Austin Rivers?
Well, it's got to be Felton, I would say. And I'm not a big fan of Felton either, but he showed, especially last year on Dallas, where they had that kind of two-headed monster of him and Darren Williams at the point, that he can be useful in limited minutes and short bursts. Definitely wouldn't make him a starter at this point, but he's still effective in a backup role. Maybe that moves Austin Rivers to the backup shooting guard behind JJ Redick, which I think is a better role for him, because what he really brings to that team is defense and a bit of shooting. He doesn't really bring playmaking ability to them. And at this point, they really shouldn't even be having to only choose between those two as who's going to take some of the burden off Chris Paul. When you look at some of the guys that signed on other teams this year and for the prices they signed for, I mean, Jeremy Lin got signed by the Nets for like 3 years, $30 million to be their starting point guard. That's about $10 million per year to be a starting point guard, and you paid Austin Rivers about $11 million to be your third or fourth guard. And then you look at the Knicks, they signed Brandon Jennings to be their backup point guard. That probably would have been a much better option for the Clippers as a backup point guard than Raymond Felton or Austin Rivers at this point.
Yeah, how do you feel that affects the dynamic of the locker room? To know that you have a player like Austin Rivers making $11 million. He's making more money than JJ Redick right now.
I mean, that could cause some conflict. I mean, that's also just a part of the inflation that's happened the last couple of years. The salary cap balloon, so the teams have to spend this money somewhere. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure JJ Redick doesn't feel any better about that. He's not just gonna go home and say, "Oh, well, inflation. What can I do about that?" There could definitely be some hard feelings. in that locker room. And if you want to know how the team feels about Austin Rivers, all you have to do is think back to that Instagram video Blake Griffin made where he basically did a caricature of Austin Rivers trying to drive to the lane to let you know how they feel about him.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Now, do you think that Blake Griffin and Chris Paul will be back next season?
No, it has to be one or the other. I honestly can't tell you who they're going to choose at this point. I mean, smart money says a guy like Doc Rivers is going to value perhaps Chris Paul more than Blake Griffin, especially after all of the nonsense off the court with Blake Griffin last year, getting into that fight with the equipment manager, punching him. I'm sure that doesn't sit well with a lot of the staff and teammates right now with him. He knows they openly shopped him as well, so there's definitely some friction there. If this was any other team where the coach wasn't also the GM, I would say perhaps there's a chance that Blake Griffin stays, because the smart money is to go with Blake Griffin instead of Chris Paul. Chris Paul is further along in his career, he's older, and he also plays a position where, if you do your homework and you play your cards right, you can find not someone as good as Chris Paul, but good enough to fill in. Or you could even just go a totally different route and load up on shooting and let Blake be your point forward, like you were saying. But given the fact that Doc Rivers is also the guy making the final decisions on these things, I'm going to say Blake is going to want to stay, but Doc's going to choose Chris Paul over Blake.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's fair. That is definitely fair. So Chris Paul is a free agent. Blake Griffin's going to be a free agent. JJ Redick's going to be a free agent. So there goes 3 of your 5 starters free agents already. Paul Pierce might start, so there goes another one of your he's going to retire. So 4 or 5 of your starters is going to be free agents technically.
Yeah. So. And I just keep thinking back to last summer where the Mavs made that big push to get DeAndre Jordan. They had the handshake agreement with him. And, the Clippers were able to, get him to reconsider and sign back with them long term. And, they were feeling like, they got the ship back on course and their title hopes were still there. But a year later, it looks just more and more like it was just a stay of execution. They just kind of delayed the inevitable, and they're gonna be sitting with the team that is gonna need basically DeAndre Jordan to carry a load he's not ready to carry next season. Well, not next season, but the season after, once one of Blake or Chris Paul leave that team. And it really is looking more and more like a tough situation to see them getting better. And they've already seemed to have capped out as a second round team as it is. So, Lob City was fun, but it might be getting hit with some cold hard reality in the next couple months.
Yeah, they have to look around the Western Conference, and you see Golden State picking up Kevin Durant. You look at San Antonio, who's just San Antonio. They're going to continue what they're doing. And then you got OKC with the reinvigorated Westbrook. The Clippers have to be looking and saying, what are we going to have to do with our team? And as you've already said, the fact that you have Doc as the GM and coach, we've already seen his GM abilities. He's not the best GM. He hasn't been able to bring in any small forward on his team. He hasn't been able to build a solid bench. I'm surprised Hugh Turkoglu's not on this team right now. It's just the same things that just keep happening. So yeah. The Western Conference has gotten better. Clippers are in the same position. They haven't got any better. I think they're going to have a tough reality check come this season.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough, but that, and I think we're looking at maybe like a 4 or 5 seed again for this Clippers team. I can't really see them pushing into a top 2 or top 3 seed at this point. And it's kind of more of the same old with them, like you said. And this might be the last year we have some of that same old. So, I feel bad for those guys. Chris Paul, he gets a bad rap at this point. I really think he deserved a conference finals run or even a finals run at some point up until now. It's a shame that he hasn't gotten there, and people kind of hold that against him. But he really has been the best point guard in this league for a long time now, and we'll just have to see what's next for them, and if they can make something special out of this season, because it's really do or die this season. They really have to reach a level they haven't reached yet, and so we'll see if it happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. If not, we're probably going to see Chris Paul in San Antonio.
Oh wow, you calling that now? You calling that now?
Calling it.
Interesting, interesting. That I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. But there's no banana boats in San Antonio, so I don't know if he'll like that.
He won't like it. But if he wants a ring, then that might be the place for him to go.
So that's interesting that you bring that up. Talking about rings, so who would you say is the favorite coming out of the West? Would you say it's the Warriors, or do you think the Spurs have something to say about that?
I still think it's the Warriors.
That was easy.
Kevin Durant is just it's just too easy. I mean, you add Kevin Durant. I mean, what do you expect to happen? You already were a great team as it was, and then you go and you add one of the best players in the league. The only thing that can mess this up is chemistry.
That's true. I mean, me personally, I'm not a believer that more is always necessarily better. Sometimes more can be a detriment. We saw this happen with a bunch of teams. The early 2000s Blazers, when Scottie Pippen went over there, everyone penciled them in like, oh, of course they're gonna win the chip. Didn't really happen. The Lakers with Nash and Howard didn't really work out well at all, but injuries also played a role there. So it's not always a guarantee that these things are gonna work out. The Wade, Bosh, LeBron super team took a year to gel. That first year they got to the finals, but they lost unexpectedly. You never know what the dynamic is gonna be once the season bears out. So while the Warriors are the best team on paper, they're also the same team that the two best players coughed up 3-1 leads. I'm just gonna say that. I'm just gonna put that out there. And we're gonna have to see if guys like Draymond like falling back down into the fourth or fifth option on this team now. When people were saying that Draymond was the real MVP of this team last year, and now we're going to put him in a situation where maybe he's the fourth guy. Is he gonna like that? I don't know. Draymond's a pretty crazy dude. He seems kind of volatile and the type of person to not be okay with that. So we'll have to see how the season plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that he wouldn't like it, but yeah, we have to see how it plays out. He seems like the kind of guy who goes home and looks at his stat sheet, and he's gonna look at his stat sheet, and he's not gonna see what he saw this season. Definitely not those triple doubles.
Yeah. So I think that wraps up our Western Conference preview. I want to thank everybody for listening, and look out for episode 3, where we're gonna talk about who we think our award winner is gonna be. Leif already put out there who his MVP winner is. We'll look into some other stuff like Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, biggest surprise team, dark horse sleepers, who we think the biggest disappointments will be. All that in store on episode 3 of the Pace and Space podcast. But thanks for listening. Good night, everybody.
Good night.